And frankly, Ms. Crockett, some might find that particular shade of green a bit festive for these proceedings. Wouldn't you agree? The words hung there, not quite an objection, not quite judicial guidance, just out there. Judge Albright leaned back, a smile playing on his lips, the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes, the kind reserved for amusement, not warmth. A low chuckle rippled through the gallery's front row. His row. The regulars knew his tells. Jasmine Crockett didn't react, not immediately. She let the silence stretch just enough. Long enough for the comment to curdle, long enough for the inappropriate edge to sharpen. Her face remained neutral, eyes fixed on his. The file in her hands felt suddenly heavier, or maybe that was just the weight of the moment. This wasn't the first time, not with him. Everyone knew about Judge Albright. His reputation preceded him like a shadow, charming on the surface, patronizing underneath. Especially if you didn't fit his mold, she finally spoke. Her voice was even, calm, remarkably steady given the sudden heat in the room. Your Honor, my attire adheres to the bar's professional standards. A simple statement of fact, no defensiveness, no apology, just the fact. Perhaps we can return to the motion regarding Exhibit C? The pivot was clean, professional. It put the ball back in his court, but subtly underlined his deviation. Albright's smile tightened. Just a fraction, barely perceptible, unless you were watching for it. And she was always watching. Of course, Ms. Crockett. Exhibit C, he shuffled some papers a little too deliberately. Though I must say your dedication to standing out is noted. Another jab, wrapped in faux admiration. The gallery shifted. The earlier chuckle died, now just an uncomfortable silence. They felt it too. The shift from playful banter, if it ever was that, to something else, something pointed. Jasmine didn't take the bait. She simply opened her file, proceeding, Your Honor. Her tone was unwavering, still respectful, but the space between the words carried a new weight, a quiet insistence. Don't go there. Albright waved a dismissive hand. Yes, yes, proceed, but his eyes lingered on her, a flicker of something sharp behind the genial mask. Annoyance or perhaps appraisal. He wasn't used to being navigated around so smoothly. He preferred ruffled feathers. He liked seeing people flustered. It confirmed his control. Jasmine began laying out her argument. Crisp. Precise, referencing statutes, case law. Her voice filled the courtroom, steady and clear. No trace of the tension from moments before, except it was there, underneath. A low hum the entire room could feel. The judge interrupted her mid-sentence. Counselor, are you quite sure about that interpretation of Rule 403? It sounds rather novel. Another word choice designed to diminish, to imply inexperience, or worse, incompetence. Jasmine paused, met his gaze again. That slow, deliberate eye contact. It wasn't novel, Your Honor. It was argued successfully in Patel v. Simmons, Third Circuit, last year. She rattled off the citation from memory, no hesitation, a quiet murmur from the back of the courtroom. Someone was impressed, or maybe just surprised. Albright blinked. His rhythm was off. He'd expected a pause, a shuffle through notes, not an instant, correct citation. Ah, yes, Patel, he tried to recover smoothly. A complex ruling, as I recall. The nuances are easily missed, implying she missed them, still digging, still trying to find a crack. Jasmine offered a small, almost imperceptible nod. The nuances are indeed critical, Your Honor, which is why we rely on the court's careful consideration, a subtle deflection, turning his implied criticism into a statement of judicial responsibility. His responsibility. He shifted in his high-backed chair. The leather creaked, loud in the suddenly quiet room. He looked down at his notes. Then back at her. The genial mask was slipping again, just a little. He cleared his throat. Continue, Ms. Crockett, but the tone was different now. Flatter. The amusement was gone, replaced by something colder, more watchful. Jasmine continued her argument, hitting each point methodically, building her case. But everyone knew the real argument wasn't about Exhibit C anymore. It was about the space between them, the unspoken challenge, the quiet resistance meeting the veiled disdain. The air crackled. The first round hadn't gone as the judge expected, not at all, and the day was still young. She finished her point, closed the file gently, her hands were steady. Her gaze, when it flicked back to him, was clear, ready for the next move, whatever it might be. The judge stared back, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then the mask was back, a slightly thinner version this time. Thank you, counselor. We'll take your colorful interpretation under advisement. A final parting shot about her outfit twisted into her legal argument. Jasmine didn't flinch, just a slow blink. As you wish, Your Honor. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant, waiting for the next beat in this unwelcome rhythm. The next week it was déjà vu. Different motion, same undercurrent. Judge Albright seemed to have remembered. His focus on Jasmine felt sharper, more intentional. He started by calling her case out of order, skipping over two earlier matters. Just a scheduling quirk, he announced. but his eyes found hers as he said it, a small assertion of power disrupting her expectation, however minor. Jasmine simply stood when called, ready, no sign of surprise or annoyance. That seemed to bother him more, her unflappability. He listened to the opposing counsel's opening with rapt attention, nodding frequently, even chuckling at a weak attempt at humor. "Thank you, Mr. Davies, eloquently put, as always." Then Jasmine approached the lectern. The judge immediately picked up a pen, started reviewing a document on his desk, not looking at her, subtle but clear, a visual dismissal before she even spoke a word. The gallery noticed. A few people exchanged glances. This felt deliberate. Jasmine waited a beat until the pen stopped moving, until his eyes reluctantly lifted. "Your Honor, if I may begin," her voice, still calm, still measured, cut through the ambient courtroom noise. Albright gave a curt nod. "The floor is yours, MS." Crockett, a slight hesitation on her name, almost imperceptible, but she noticed. He knew her name perfectly well by now. Another microaggression, tiny, easily deniable, but part of a pattern. She began her argument, laying out the facts clearly, concisely. Within 2 minutes, he interrupted. "Counselor, are you familiar with the standard established in Michelson? It seems pertinent here, wouldn't you say?" His tone was helpful, too helpful. The question itself wasn't unreasonable. But its timing, its delivery, it was designed to derail, to make her seem unprepared. Jasmine paused, met his gaze directly. "Yes, Your Honor, Michelson established the standard for undue burden." However, as argued in the subsequent Chen ruling, she smoothly integrated his interruption, used it as a springboard to strengthen her own point, citing the more recent, relevant case law, again from memory. Albright's brow furrowed slightly. He'd expected a different response. A moment of confusion, perhaps. A request for clarification, not this seamless incorporation. He leaned forward. "But Chen, Ms. Crockett, wasn't that case focused primarily on corporate entities? How does that specific precedent apply here in a case involving individual liability?" He was testing her, probing for weakness, trying to paint her application of the law as flawed. "Your Honor, while the primary parties were corporate, the court's reasoning in Chen explicitly addressed the broader principle of foreseeability, which is directly applicable to the matter of individual liability in this context. Paragraph 4 outlines this clearly. She didn't raise her voice, didn't display any frustration, just laid out the legal logic, coolly, precisely. The air in the courtroom grew still. The audience was locked onto the exchange. This wasn't just legal argument anymore. This was a duel, fought with citations and statutes instead of swords. Albright sat back again, tapped his pen on the desk, a rhythmic, irritating sound. Tap, tap, tap. His eyes narrowed slightly. He seemed to be searching for another angle, another way to regain the upper hand. He glanced at the clock. "Counselor, be mindful of the time. We have other matters waiting." A common judicial reminder, but deployed now it felt like pressure, an attempt to rush her, to fluster her. Jasmine nodded. "Understood, Your Honor. I have 2 further points to address briefly." She didn't speed up, didn't truncate her argument, just acknowledged his comment and continued at her measured pace, maintaining control of her presentation. He interrupted again less than a minute later. "Let's focus on the core issue, Ms. Crockett. The documentation you provided, frankly, it seems a bit thin in Section 3. Are you certain this is your complete submission?" The implication was clear: incompetence or deliberate omission. Jasmine didn't rise to it. "Your Honor, Section 3 contains all relevant documents currently available through discovery. As noted in footnote 7, we are awaiting further production from opposing counsel regarding the outstanding server logs." She pointed to the specific footnote in the filed documents, again demonstrating thoroughness, anticipating his challenge. Albright fell silent. He looked at opposing counsel, Mr. Davies. "Mr. Davies, any response to that? Regarding the server logs," Davies looked momentarily flustered. Yes, Your Honor, we are working diligently to retrieve those logs. There were some technical difficulties." Albright cut him off. "See that it's expedited, Mr. Davies. The court requires completeness." He turned back to Jasmine, his expression unreadable. "You may conclude your argument, Ms. Crockett, briefly." The word briefly hung in the air, a final attempt to assert control. Jasmine concluded, succinctly hitting her final points. Her voice remained steady, professional, but her eyes, when she finished and looked at the judge, held a question. A silent question. "Are we done with this?" Albright avoided her gaze this time. He made some notes, fiddled with his microphone. "Thank you, Counselor. The court will take the matter under advisement. We will reconvene after a short recess." He banged the gavel perhaps a little harder than necessary, stood abruptly, and swept out of the courtroom through his private door, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. The audience began to murmur. Low, buzzing conversations, people shaking their heads, others looking at Jasmine with a mixture of sympathy and admiration. She gathered her files calmly, gave a polite nod to Mr. Davies, who looked slightly embarrassed, and walked out of the courtroom, her posture erect, her expression composed. But the tension was rolling off her in waves. The pattern was undeniable now. It wasn't just a bad day or a personality clash. It was targeted, and everyone in that room knew it. The question was what would happen next time. How long could this quiet battle continue? How long before something snapped? The hearing on the preliminary injunction felt different, charged. Word had gotten around the courthouse, about the judge and the young lawyer, about the tension you could cut with a knife. The gallery was fuller than usual. Law clerks, other attorneys, even a couple of local reporters pretending to be interested in the case itself. They were there for the subtext, the unfolding drama. Judge Albright seemed aware of the increased scrutiny. He entered the courtroom with a more formal bearing, less of the forced charm, more gravitas, or an attempt at it. He began the proceedings smoothly, handling the initial procedural matters with crisp efficiency. Maybe today would be different, some thought. Maybe the attention had tempered him. Then Jasmine's case was called. She stepped up to the lectern, and the shift was immediate, subtle but palpable. The judge's posture tightened, his gaze sharpened. "Ms. Crockett, the court has reviewed your brief regarding the injunction." He paused, flipping through the pages dismissively. "Frankly, I'm finding the central argument aspirational. Aspirational, such a carefully chosen word. Not wrong, not unsupported. Just hopeful, unrealistic, designed to undermine confidence." Jasmine stood motionless for a second, processing the choice of word. "Your Honor, the argument is grounded in established precedent regarding irreparable harm, specifically the standards set forth in Winter v. NRDC. She met his challenge directly, calmly citing the controlling Supreme Court case. Albright waved a hand. "Yes, yes, Winter. Everyone knows Winter. But applying it here requires a certain interpretive leap, wouldn't you say? One that stretches the definition of irreparable harm rather thin." He leaned forward, elbows on the bench. His voice dripped with condescension. "Are you sure you fully grasp the nuances of that standard, counselor? It's often misinterpreted by those less experienced in this particular area of law." There it was, a direct shot at her competence, wrapped in a veneer of professorial concern. The courtroom was dead silent, everyone waiting for her reaction. A flash of anger, stumbling words. Jasmine's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes hardened. A memory flickered. Late night, law library, hunched over casebooks. The pressure of finals. Professor Davies, ironically no relation to the opposing counsel today, the one who always seemed to doubt her, questioned her presence in his advanced constitutional law seminar, asking if she was sure she was ready for this level of analysis. That same feeling, being underestimated. Having to prove herself twice as hard just to be seen as competent. It fueled her now, not with anger, but with focus. "Your Honor, my understanding of Winter and its progeny is quite thorough." Her voice was low but carried. "The irreparable harm demonstrated in our filings, the imminent loss of proprietary data and market position, aligns squarely with the type of injury the Winter standard was designed to prevent. It's not a leap, it's a direct application." She held his gaze. No blinking, no hesitation. The judge seemed taken aback by the directness, the refusal to be intimidated. He scoffed lightly. "A nervous sound, a bold assertion, Ms. Crockett, bold. Perhaps bordering on," he trailed off, searching for the right word, "overly enthusiastic." Jasmine tilted her head slightly, a minimal movement, but it conveyed challenge. "With respect, Your Honor, the facts support the assertion. Enthusiasm doesn't change the facts." The air crackled, a gasp from someone in the gallery. Soft but audible, she wasn't just defending her argument now. She was calling out his bias, gently, politely, but undeniably. Albright's face flushed. A dull red crept up his neck. The mask wasn't just slipping now, it was cracking. "Counselor, you are very close to crossing a line here." His voice was tight, strained. "I am reminding you of the standards of professional decorum." Jasmine stood her ground. "I am well aware of the standards, Your Honor. And I am adhering to them by presenting my client's case vigorously, based on the law and the facts." Her calmness was its own form of pressure. It made his reaction seem disproportionate, unjudicial. He gripped the edge of the bench, his knuckles white. "Mr. Davies," he snapped, turning to opposing counsel, "do you have anything to add that might bring some clarity to this matter?" He was looking for an ally, someone to validate his perspective. Davies, caught in the crossfire, looked uncomfortable. "Well, Your Honor, we believe Ms. Crockett's interpretation is certainly debatable." He stammered slightly, clearly not wanting to antagonize the judge, but also aware of the dynamics at play. Debatable, Albright repeated, seizing on the word. Precisely. Debatable, not established, not clear-cut. He looked back at Jasmine, a triumphant glint in his eyes. Thank you, Mr. Davies. That was clarifying. He thought he'd scored a point. Thought he'd used opposing counsel to undermine her. But Jasmine just waited, patiently, until he was finished. Then she spoke again, her voice still level. Your Honor, legal arguments are often debatable. That is the nature of our adversarial system. Our job is to present the strongest case based on precedent. Their job is to attempt to rebut it. The court's job is to weigh the merits objectively. The final word hung in the air. Objectively, another quiet challenge, another reminder of his duty. Albright stared at her, speechless for a moment. The charm was completely gone now, replaced by undisguised animosity. He knew he was losing control of the narrative, of the room. He took a deep breath, visibly trying to regain composure. The court requires no lectures on its duties, Ms. Crockett. His voice was cold, flat. We will take a brief recess. 15 minutes. He banged the gavel sharply, stood without looking at her, and exited quickly. The moment the door closed behind him, the courtroom erupted in hushed whispers. Eyes darted towards Jasmine. She remained at the lectern for a moment, took a slow breath, then calmly gathered her papers. Her hands trembled slightly as she put them in her briefcase, just slightly. No one noticed, or perhaps they pretended not to. She hadn't cracked, not outwardly, but the cost of that composure was clear. It was etched in the tension around her eyes, the slight tightening of her jaw. This wasn't sustainable. Something had to give. The mask was off. The battle lines were drawn. And the judge was angry. The recess felt longer than 15 minutes. The air in the hallway outside the courtroom buzzed. Lawyers huddled, whispering, sharing stories, other Albright encounters. Jasmine stood near a window, looking out but not really seeing the traffic below, trying to center herself, replaying the exchanges, analyzing his tactics. His anger was dangerous, unpredictable. It wasn't just about winning the legal point anymore. It felt like he needed to win against her. She needed to be careful, very careful. When the bailiff called them back in, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. People leaned forward in their seats. Judge Albright took the bench. His face was set, hard, impassive, but radiating coldness. He didn't look at Jasmine as she returned to the lectern. He addressed the room generally. The court has considered the arguments presented regarding the plaintiff's motion for a preliminary injunction. He paused, shuffled some papers, a deliberate action. Regarding the motion, he looked directly at Jasmine now, his eyes cold, holding no trace of the earlier forced congeniality. The court finds the plaintiff has not met the high burden required to demonstrate a clear likelihood of success on the merits, nor has the plaintiff sufficiently established irreparable harm that outweighs the potential hardship to the defendant. A collective intake of breath in the gallery. Not necessarily a shocking legal conclusion. Injunctions are indeed hard to get. The delivery, the timing, the preceding conflict, it felt punitive. It felt like retaliation served cold. Therefore, the motion for a preliminary injunction is denied. He finished abruptly, clinical, final. Jasmine didn't react immediately. No gasp, no visible frustration, no protest. She simply stood there, silent, holding his gaze. The silence stretched. 1 second, 2, 3, 4. It became uncomfortable, tangible. Albright shifted in his chair. The silence was unexpected. He had braced for something. An argument, a plea for reconsideration, a flash of anger, anything but this quiet, unwavering stillness. The silence wasn't empty. It was hers now. She owned it. It filled the space his judgment had left vacant. It questioned without speaking a single word. It radiated dissent without being disrespectful. Is there anything further, Ms. Crockett? He finally asked, his voice a bit sharper than intended. The silence had clearly unnerved him. Cracked his composure again, just slightly. Jasmine gave a slow, deliberate blink. Her signature move now, it seemed. No, Your Honor, just 2 words, quietly spoken. But they landed with surprising force in the tense room. The absence of fight, the complete lack of visible disappointment, seemed to throw him off balance more than any argument could have. He had expected her to be ruffled, defeated, demoralized. Instead, she projected calm acceptance of his ruling. But not agreement with his reasoning or his methods. It was a subtle distinction, but a powerful one. Very well, he said quickly, trying to regain the courtroom rhythm. What is the next matter on the docket, Mr. Clerk? He attempted to move on, to assert normalcy. But the echo of that profound silence lingered, a quiet judgment on his judgment. Jasmine remained standing at the lectern for a moment longer than strictly necessary, gathering her thoughts. Or perhaps just making a silent point about presence, about not being dismissed. Then slowly, deliberately, she gathered her files. Her movements were precise. Economical, no wasted motion, no sign of haste or frustration. She projected pure professionalism under duress. As she turned to leave the lectern, her eyes swept briefly across the gallery. She saw the sympathetic looks, the knowing glances, the quiet nods of encouragement. She offered no acknowledgement, maintaining her composed mask. Just continued her walk back to her table. Albright watched her walk. His jaw was tight. He knew somehow that denying the motion hadn't felt like the victory he might have anticipated. Her silence, her profound lack of reaction, had stolen that from him. It had flipped the power dynamic in a way he hadn't anticipated and couldn't counter directly. He was the judge. He held the gavel. He made the rulings. But in that moment of quiet defiance, she held the room's attention, its respect. He felt a grudging, unwelcome flicker of something that might have been respect for her steeliness, buried deep beneath layers of profound annoyance and wounded judicial pride. He quickly stamped it out. Clearing his throat loudly, perhaps too loudly, he called the next case, trying desperately to reassert his authority through volume and rigid procedure. But the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. The audience wasn't just observing a legal proceeding anymore. They were witnessing something more fundamental. A struggle for dignity, a quiet refusal to be diminished under pressure, a masterclass in resilience. Jasmine sat at her table, organizing her papers meticulously. She could feel the eyes on her, from the gallery, from opposing counsel. Even, she suspected, from the judge himself, though she didn't look back towards the bench. She hadn't won the motion. That was a definite setback for her client, and she felt the weight of that responsibility. But in the larger battle, the one playing out in the charged air of that courtroom, the one about respect and fairness, she hadn't lost either. Her silence had been louder than any argument she could have made about his bias. It had exposed his pettiness more effectively than any direct accusation would have. He had the power to rule against her arguments, but he didn't have the power to break her composure. And that undeniable fact seemed to infuriate him more than anything else she could have possibly done or said. She took a deep breath, releasing it slowly. The fight wasn't over, far from it. This was just entering a new, more dangerous phase. His pride was wounded now, deeply. And a judge with wounded pride, nursing a grudge, was a dangerous adversary. She would need more than just sharp legal skill moving forward. She would need extraordinary resilience. And perhaps a different kind of strategy for the next encounter. The quiet power of silence had worked powerfully today. But he would be expecting it next time. He would adapt his tactics. What else did she have in her arsenal? She glanced up, catching the eye of a young law student in the back row, the same one from before. The student offered a small, almost imperceptible, encouraging nod. A tiny gesture of solidarity across the crowded room, but it resonated deeply. She wasn't entirely alone in this fight. The audience saw, they understood what was happening. That knowledge settled something profound within her. A quiet, steely resolve hardened her spine. Let him come, she would be ready. She would continue to do her job. The next hearing was a masterclass in microaggressions. Judge Albright seemed to have recalibrated his approach. No more overt hostility, no more easily identifiable cracks in the judicial mask. Instead, a steady, demoralizing drizzle of small slights. Calculated moves designed to wear her down, chip away at her composure piece by tiny piece. It started subtly, almost deniably. He consistently referred to her only as counselor, while addressing opposing counsel Davies repeatedly as Mr. Davies, sometimes even Charles. A minor difference in formality, technically correct perhaps, but noticeable in its stark repetition. A deliberate way of depersonalizing her, keeping her at a formal, less respectful distance compared to her male colleague. Then came the constant, nitpicking interruptions, not on substantive legal points this time. That hadn't worked well for him before. Now it was about trivial procedural matters. Ms. Crockett, please ensure your microphone is adjusted correctly. Your voice seems to fade occasionally, making it difficult for the court to follow. It wasn't fatting. Her voice was clear and steady. Ms. Crockett, could you perhaps slow down just a fraction for the court reporter? We want to ensure every precious word is captured accurately. Sarcasm, thinly veiled as procedural concern. She wasn't speaking too quickly. Her packing was deliberate. Ms. Crockett, let's try to keep the exhibits organized precisely in the pre-approved manner outlined by the clerk. It saves everyone valuable time when we adhere strictly to protocol. Her exhibits were perfectly organized, tabbed, and indexed exactly as required. Each comment viewed in isolation seemed minor, perhaps even justifiable on its face if you weren't paying attention. but stacked one after another relentlessly, the pattern was undeniable. This was harassment by 1,000 paper cuts, psychological warfare under the guise of courtroom management. The gallery felt it. The air grew thick with second-hand frustration. A low murmur followed the third interruption in less than 10 minutes. A restless shifting in seats, uncomfortable coughs breaking the tension. They knew what he was doing, and they didn't like it. Jasmine's response was a study in controlled consistency. She adjusted the microphone slightly without comment, her eyes briefly meeting his. She slowed her pace marginally for a single sentence or two, then resumed her normal, effective cadence. She pointed silently to the clearly marked exhibit tabs, confirming their established order without breaking the stride of her argument. Each time she met his gaze briefly, coolly, acknowledged the interruption with a minimal nod, and returned immediately to her argument, calmly, methodically, refusing to let him derail her focus, refusing to show even a flicker of irritation. This unwavering composure seemed only to fuel his efforts. He began praising Mr. Davies excessively, almost absurdly. "Excellent point, Mr. Davies," cogently argued. "The court appreciates your clarity on this complex issue." This lavish praise was for a routine procedural statement any first-year associate could make. The contrast was stark. He questioned Jasmine on basic facts already established firmly in the record, facts he clearly knew. "Now, counselor, remind the court again what was the precise date of the initial contract signing. I seem to have misplaced that specific note among my papers." He hadn't misplaced it. It was right there in the file before him. He was testing her patience, trying to make her look flustered, searching for information or unprepared on basic details. "January 14th, 2022, Your Honor." As stipulated on page 3 of the submitted joint agreement exhibit, she answered instantly. Provided the exact citation without hesitation, no hint of annoyance in her voice, just the facts. Then came the name, the ultimate petty power play. He'd hesitated before. Now he got it subtly but deliberately wrong. "Ms. Crockett," he paused, looking directly at her. "Is that the correct pronunciation? I do want to get it right." He feigned earnest politeness, a performance for the record. "It's Crockett, Your Honor, 2 syllables." She corrected him simply, firmly, immediately. No apology requested or offered for his error, no awkwardness conveyed, just the swift, clear correction. "Ah, Crockett, Crockett, my apologies." So many names to keep track of in this busy docket. He smiled that tight, insincere smile again. Dismissive, patronizing, the deliberate mispronunciation followed by the faux apology, a classic tactic, designed to diminish identity, imply insignificance, make her feel like an outsider. She didn't let it land. Her correction was immediate, matter of fact, unemotional. She moved on instantly, refusing to dwell on it, returning seamlessly to her point about Section 5's contractual obligations. The rhythm of the hearing became staccato. Grinding, his interruption, her calm, factual response, his next subtle jab, her steady continuation of her argument. It was relentless, exhausting just to watch. "Objection, Your Honor, relevance." Mr. Davies chimed in, perhaps feeling emboldened by the judge's clear bias or perhaps just doing his job strategically. Judge Albright sustained the objection instantly, almost before Davies finished speaking. Sustained. "Ms. Crockett, please try to stick to the clearly pertinent facts related to this specific motion." The objection was weak. Her point was demonstrably relevant to the broader context. But Albright seized the opportunity. Another small cut. Another way to disrupt her flow. "Understood, Your Honor." The relevance of this point will become immediately clear when linked to the subsequent email correspondence dated March 8th, which I am introducing now as Exhibit G. She kept going, weaving her argument thread by thread, refusing to be silenced or thrown off course. The tension in the room was palpable now. You could feel the collective wince with each interruption, the shared frustration. The audience was no longer just observing. They were participating emotionally, feeling the sting of the injustice, the unfairness of the relentless, petty attacks. Their sympathy was clearly, almost universally, with Jasmine now. It showed in their focused attention whenever she spoke. The way they leaned forward slightly in their seats. The subtle, silent shakes of heads when the judge interrupted yet again with another pointless clarification. Albright must have sensed the shift in the room's energy. Or perhaps he was simply growing increasingly frustrated by her absolute refusal to break, to show any sign of weakness. His microaggressions started becoming slightly less micro, more pointed. "Counselor, your interpretation of that particular contractual clause seems, well, willfully obtuse. Are you intentionally ignoring the plain language staring us all in the face? Willfully obtuse. a direct accusation of bad faith, a serious charge against an officer of the court. Jasmine paused, let the accusation hang in the air for a beat. This required more than just a calm correction or citation. This was a direct attack on her integrity. She took a slow, deliberate breath. "Your Honor," she began, her voice still even but carrying a new edge of firmness. "I am interpreting the clause in light of established industry standards and the documented pattern of communications between the parties prior to signing. My interpretation is based squarely on presented evidence, Your Honor, not willfulness." She held his gaze. A line had been drawn in the sand. Albright leaned back. A smug, almost triumphant look crossed his face. He thought he'd finally gotten under her skin. Industry standards can be notoriously subjective, counselor. Unlike the clear, unambiguous plain language of a written contract. Surely you agree with that principle? He thought he had her cornered, pinned her as relying on fuzzy, subjective interpretation over the hard, objective text of the document. Jasmine didn't take the bait. She didn't get drawn into a philosophical argument about subjectivity versus plain language. Instead, she did something completely unexpected, something disarming. She smiled. Just a small, brief, almost imperceptible smile. It wasn't a smile of amusement or warmth. It was a smile of sudden, clear understanding. Like she finally saw the entire game laid out before her, and she simply refused to play it by his rules anymore. "The plain language, Your Honor," she said, the smile fading as quickly as it appeared, her voice regaining its professional edge, "is precisely what supports our position, especially when read in the full context of the entire agreement, specifically considering Section 7B. She calmly flipped to the relevant page in her meticulously organized binder, held it up slightly, angled towards the bench, inviting him, daring him to look, to engage with the actual substance of the case. Not the personal attacks, not the procedural gamesmanship. Albright stared at her. The brief smile, the sudden shift in tactic had clearly disarmed him, thrown him completely off his rhythm. He looked momentarily flustered, caught off guard. He didn't look at the binder she indicated. He looked down at his own papers, shuffling them needlessly. He avoided her direct gaze. Yes, well, the court will certainly review Section 7B and its considerations. He mumbled the words, his earlier confidence evaporating. She had weathered the storm, the relentless barrage of microaggressions. She had absorbed the cuts, refused to bleed openly, and somehow, through sheer resilience and a sudden, unexpected tactical shift, she had subtly, undeniably gained ground. He had thrown his entire arsenal of petty torments and condescension at her, and she was still standing, still focused, still calmly, effectively arguing her client's case. The relentless rhythm of attack and defense left the entire courtroom feeling drained, exhausted by the spectacle. It was clear to everyone present that this dynamic couldn't continue indefinitely. The pressure was building to an unsustainable level, building towards something critical. Something had to break. And watching Jasmine Crockett stand there, poised and resolute after everything he'd thrown at her, it seemed increasingly unlikely that it would be her. Albright knew he was losing. Not necessarily the legal case on its merits. He still held the ultimate power to rule on that. But he was losing the courtroom. He was losing the narrative. He was losing the silent, intense battle of wills that had come to define these proceedings. He could feel the audience slipping away from him. Their sympathy, initially perhaps mixed or hesitant, now firmly, almost tangibly consolidated behind the calm, steady lawyer he kept trying and failing to undermine. He could feel his own carefully constructed composure fraying at the edges, despite his best efforts to maintain the requisite mask of judicial impartiality. Her refusal to be baited, her infuriating, quiet confidence, her ability to absorb his jabs and turn them back on him with simple facts and logic, it was maddening. He needed to regain control, decisively. He needed to reassert his dominance in a way she couldn't deflect. He saw his chance during her cross-examination of Davies' key witness, a senior corporate executive, a Mr. Henderson, smooth, polished, clearly prepped within an inch of his life. Jasmine was meticulously, patiently dismantling his carefully rehearsed testimony, catching him in small but significant inconsistencies, exposing contradictions between his sworn statements and the documented evidence, emails, memos, internal reports. She was doing it politely, professionally, following all the rules of evidence, but it was devastatingly effective. Henderson was starting to look flustered. He kept shifting uncomfortably in the witness seat. His gaze darted towards Davies, his own lawyer, seeking help, a lifeline. Albright saw an opening, not just to rescue the witness, but potentially to trap Jasmine, to finally put her in her place. He waited, letting her draw the witness further into the web of contradictions. He waited for her to ask a particularly pointed, damaging question, one that highlighted a clear, undeniable discrepancy between Henderson's current testimony about safety protocols and an internal email he himself had sent months earlier explicitly downplaying those same protocols. "Ms. Crockett," before Mr. Henderson answers that question, Albright interrupted smoothly, holding up a hand palm out, projecting calm authority. The court is becoming concerned about the overall direction of this particular line of questioning. He adopted a thoughtful, concerned expression, leaning forward slightly. "It seems to the court, Counselor, that you are attempting to impeach the witness on what appears to be a purely collateral matter." The specific legal term, collateral matter, was crucial. If her questioning truly related only to a side issue, not directly relevant to the core facts of the case, it would be improper impeachment. It was a technical basis to shut her down. Jasmine paused. She knew instantly it wasn't collateral, not even close. Henderson's email, his attitude towards the protocols, went directly to the heart of the witness's credibility regarding negligence, the central issue of the entire case. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this is not a collateral matter." It goes directly to Mr. Henderson's veracity regarding his knowledge and instructions concerning the timeline of safety implementation, which is a central element of Albright cut her off again. Sharper this time, more impatient. "That is your interpretation, Counselor. The court perceives it differently." He leaned forward further, his voice taking on a tone of unmistakable finality, a tone of warning. "I am cautioning you right now, Ms. Crockett. Persist down this line of questioning, persist in pursuing this tangential issue, and you risk facing sanctions from this court for deliberately attempting to mislead the court and unfairly prejudice the witness." Sanctions. The word hung heavy in the suddenly silent courtroom. A serious threat, not just a ruling against her question. This meant potential fines, a formal reprimand on her professional record, significant damage to her reputation within the legal community. It was a clear, massive escalation. A direct, punitive threat meant to intimidate her into submission. The gallery gasped audibly this time. A collective shockwave went through the room. This was no longer subtext. This was open judicial hostility, bullying from the bench. Albright felt a surge of adrenaline, a sense of regaining control. He had her now, he truly believed it. He had backed her into an impossible corner. She either had to retreat immediately, looking weak, incompetent, and thoroughly chastened, or she could defy his direct order, risking serious, career-damaging professional consequences. He leaned back slightly in his chair, adopting a look of stern, unwavering authority on his face, waiting for her inevitable submission, for her apology. He expected her to stammer, to argue defensively, to maybe even tear up under the pressure. Anything but what happened next. Jasmine stood perfectly still, motionless at the lectern, her eyes locked onto his, unflinching. The courtroom held its breath. The silence stretched, thick with tension. This felt like a precipice, a point of no return. She could feel the weight of his threat, the potential damage to her career, the career she had worked so incredibly hard to build. She thought again of those late nights studying, the sacrifices made along the way, the clients who placed their trust, their futures in her hands. Giving in now felt like a betrayal of all that. A betrayal of herself. But defiance, the risk was enormous. He held the power, he could make good on his threat. She took a slow, deliberate breath. Inhale, exhale. Her training kicked in. Stay calm, think clearly, analyze the situation. He had grossly mischaracterized her questioning, knowingly or recklessly. He was using the threat of sanctions improperly, abusively, to shield a witness who was clearly faltering under legitimate cross-examination. He was abusing the power of his office. And he was doing it openly, brazenly, in front of everyone. In that moment of clarity, she made a decision, not aggression. That would play into his hands, make her look unprofessional, not submission. That would validate his bullying, truth, delivered calmly but unequivocally. "Your Honor," she began, her voice low but perfectly clear, resonating with unexpected strength in the utterly silent room. "I understand the court's caution regarding proper procedure." She acknowledged his statement first, showing respect for the position, the robe, if not the man currently wearing it. However, Rule 608(b) of the Federal Rules of Evidence explicitly permits inquiry into specific instances of conduct concerning a witness's character for truthfulness or untruthfulness during cross-examination, when probative of that character. She cited the specific rule of evidence, flawlessly, From memory, her voice gaining conviction. This line of questioning directly addresses Mr. Henderson's truthfulness regarding his prior knowledge and deliberate concealment of the faulty data entry, a fact absolutely critical to the core element of negligence in this case. She laid out the precise legal basis for her actions. Clearly, concisely, irrefutably. It is therefore not collateral, Your Honor. It is fundamental to the case. She paused for a beat. Let the weight of the rules, the law itself, settle palpably in the space between them. Let the audience absorb the clear logic. Then she delivered the final part, looking directly into his eyes, her voice unwavering, steady, resolute, to suggest that this legitimate line of questioning is somehow misleading the court or warrants the extreme measure of sanctions. Another perfectly timed pause, just a beat, allowing the implication to land, feels like an attempt to obstruct the pursuit of truth rather than uphold it. Boom. The words landed like stones dropped into a deep, still well. Direct, unflinching, devastatingly accurate. She hadn't directly accused him of personal bias, though everyone felt it. She had framed his actions, his threat, his interruption, as obstructing the very purpose of the court itself, finding the truth. She used his own weapon, the supposed sanctity and integrity of the judicial process, against him. It was surgical, precise, unanswerable, silence, absolute stunned silence. You could hear a pin drop in the packed courtroom. No murmurs this time. No gasps, just profound stillness, a collective holding of breath. Jasmine's words hung in the air, heavy and sharp, reverberating. Feels like an attempt to obstruct the pursuit of truth rather than uphold it. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't delivered with anger or malice. It was spoken with the same chilling calm she had maintained throughout the entire ordeal. But the impact was utterly explosive, a direct hit, right on target, right on his judicial conscience or lack thereof. Judge Albright froze. Completely, his stern, authoritative expression dissolved instantly, replaced by utter shock, naked disbelief, then something akin to panic. His face went pale, then flushed a deep, splotchy crimson. His mouth opened slightly as if to speak, then closed again. No sound came out. He looked like he'd been physically struck, winded. The gallery was frozen too, eyes wide, darting back and forth between the judge on the bench and the lawyer at the lectern, waiting. Wondering what cataclysmic event would happen next. Would he explode in rage, declare her in contempt on the spot, order the bailiff to take her into custody? The power dynamic in the room didn't just shift, it completely shattered. In that single, quiet, devastatingly precise sentence, Jasmine had reclaimed not just her space, but the moral high ground of the entire proceeding. She hadn't just defended her actions, she had implicitly framed his actions, his blatant intervention, his baseless threat, as the actual transgression against justice. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't insulted him personally. She had simply spoken the undeniable truth of the situation, cloaked elegantly in the language of legal principle and judicial duty. It was strategically, ethically, surgically brilliant. Albright sputtered, tried to regain his footing. Ms. Ms. Crockett, you. That is entirely. He couldn't form a coherent sentence. His mind seemed unable to process what had just happened, how his control had evaporated so completely. He looked around the courtroom almost desperately, as if searching for backup, for validation, for someone to nod in agreement with him, but all eyes were on him, waiting, watching, silently judging his reaction. He saw no support in those faces, only stunned silence and rapt, unwavering attention on his unraveling. His authority, so confidently, even arrogantly wielded just moments before, seemed to evaporate under the weight of her quiet, powerful accusation. He gripped the gavel on the bench, lifted it slightly, reflexively, then set it down again, gently, as if suddenly unsure of its power, or perhaps suddenly unsure of his right to wield it in this moment. He cleared his throat, a dry, rasping, inadequate sound in the profound silence. The court will, take a brief recess. His voice was strained, thin, unrecognizable from its usual commanding tone. He almost choked on the word recess. He stood abruptly, unsteadily, his movements jerky, lacking his usual fluid confidence. Without looking at Jasmine again, without looking at anyone in the gallery, he turned and practically fled through the private door behind the bench, leaving behind a courtroom vibrating with unspoken energy, a palpable sense of shock and awe. The moment the door clicked shut behind him, the thick silence broke, not with whispers this time, but with a collective exhale, a sudden release of tension so thick it felt almost physical. Then a low buzz started immediately, growing louder by the second, people turning to each other, eyes wide with disbelief and astonishment. "Did you hear that? I cannot believe she actually said it." He just crumbled, completely fell apart. A young lawyer in the front row let out a single, sharp laugh of pure astonishment, quickly stifled but definitely heard in the charged atmosphere. Mr. Davies, the opposing counsel, looked pale and stunned. He slowly sat down at his table, shaking his head slightly as if trying to process the implosion he'd just witnessed. The witness, Mr. Henderson, still sitting awkwardly on the stand, looked utterly bewildered, forgotten entirely in the judicial meltdown. Jasmine remained at the lectern. For a moment she just stood there. Her heart was pounding like a drum against her ribs. Adrenaline coursed hotly through her veins, but outwardly she projected absolute calm. She took a slow, deep breath, centered herself in the swirling energy of the room. She looked down at her notes, though the words on the page were a blur, replaying the moment, the calculated risk she took, the devastating impact it had clearly landed. It had been a gamble, a huge one. It could have backfired spectacularly, ending her career in that courtroom. But she had trusted her instincts, trusted the power of the truth spoken plainly, and trusted that the sheer blatantness of his actions could not withstand direct, calm, principled confrontation. She had called his bluff on his abuse of power, and he had folded, completely, spectacularly. She slowly, deliberately gathered her papers. Her hands were perfectly steady now. The tremor from the earlier hearing was gone. As she turned to walk back to her counsel table, her eyes met those of the court reporter seated nearby. The reporter, usually a mask of professional impassivity, gave her a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. A flicker of acknowledgement, of shared understanding, of witnessing something extraordinary. Then Jasmine saw it, out of the corner of her eye, a spectator in the third row holding up their smartphone, angled slightly towards the bench, then towards her, discreetly recording. Had they been recording all along, through all the microaggressions, or did they just start when the confrontation escalated to its climax? Her heart skipped a beat. This specific moment, his blatant threat, her calm response, his visible unraveling, her final, devastating sentence. It might not stay contained within these four walls. The thought was both terrifying in its potential ramifications and strangely validating. If the wider world saw what happened here today, if they saw the clear bias, the naked abuse of power, if they saw the quiet, dignified resistance, what would happen then? What forces might be unleashed? She pushed the thought away for now. Deal with the immediate first. Survive the rest of this hearing. She reached her table, sat down, took a measured sip of water from the glass there, waited for the judge to eventually return, wondering what version of him would walk back through that door. The enraged judge doubling down, the utterly chastened one. Or something else entirely, something unpredictable. The courtroom buzzed around her with excited speculation. But Jasmine sat in a bubble of quiet, intense focus. She had spoken her truth to power. Now she had to prepare to face the consequences, whatever they might be. The viral moment, whether truly viral yet or not, had landed with the force of a detonation. The shockwave was still expanding outwards. The recess stretched. 10 minutes became 20. 20 bled into 30, then 45. The buzz in the courtroom gradually settled into an anxious, speculative quiet. Where was the judge? What was happening back in chambers? Lawyers checked their watches impatiently. Whispered consultations between counsel intensified. Was he drafting a contempt order against her? Was he calling the chief judge for advice or backup? Was he simply having a complete meltdown behind closed doors? Jasmine sat calmly at her table, prepared for any eventuality. She meticulously reviewed her notes for the remainder of the cross-examination of Mr. Henderson, focused intently on the task still ahead, projecting an unwavering image of readiness, of being entirely unfazed by the preceding drama. Finally, after nearly an hour, the door behind the bench opened slowly. Judge Albright re-entered the courtroom. He looked diminished, strikingly so. His posture was less rigid, almost slumped. His face was still flushed, but the raw anger seemed replaced by a kind of weary, profound tension. He walked slowly, deliberately to the bench, sat down heavily in the large chair. It seemed to swallow him. He surveyed the courtroom with a sweeping gaze. His eyes flickered past Jasmine, not quite meeting hers directly. "The court is back in session," he announced. His voice was flat, monotone, devoid of its earlier booming confidence and condescension. He cleared his throat, a small, nervous sound. "Ms. Crockett," he said, his gaze fixed firmly down at the papers on his desk. "The court recognizes the critical importance of thorough and vigorous cross-examination in our adversarial system." He paused, seemed to struggle internally to find the right words, or perhaps the least incriminating ones. While the court maintains its inherent concerns about ensuring focus and avoiding undue prejudice, perhaps the court's previous characterization of your line of questioning was hasty. It wasn't an apology, Not even close. It was a carefully worded, grudging retreat. A significant, face-saving climb down from the explicit threat of sanctions he had leveled just an hour before. He couldn't bring himself to admit he was wrong. Not directly. But he clearly couldn't uphold his aggressive threat either. Not after being so thoroughly exposed, so publicly dismantled by her calm recitation of the rules and her pointed observation about truth. He looked up then, finally meeting her gaze across the courtroom. A flicker of deep resentment still burned there, but it was mixed now with weariness, defeat. You may proceed with your questioning, Ms. Crockett, but the court reminds you again to remain strictly within the clearly defined bounds of Rule 608B. He tried desperately to inject a final note of lingering authority into the end of that sentence, to salvage some shred of control, but it fell completely flat. His voice lacked conviction. Yes, Your Honor, thank you. Jasmine simply nodded once, accepted his concession without comment, without expression. No, I told you so. No visible sign of triumph or satisfaction. That would be weakness. Letting him see how much his actions, his retreat, affected her. She turned back immediately to the witness stand, refocusing her attention. Mr. Henderson, before the recess, I asked you about the specific email dated June 3rd, where you explicitly instructed your staff to disregard the accumulating error logs related to the beta test. Do you recall giving that specific instruction? Her voice was exactly the same as it was before his dramatic interruption. Calm, focused, professional, unwavering, she picked up the cross-examination exactly where she left off. As if the entire dramatic confrontation, the hour-long recess, the judge's near meltdown, hadn't happened at all. That in itself was a masterstroke, a powerful move demonstrating that his outburst, his threats, his attempt to derail her had ultimately failed. Hadn't thrown her off her game in the slightest. Mr. Henderson, who had clearly been sweating under the collar during the prolonged recess, visibly stammered. I believe the instruction was more nuanced, to prioritize. Jasmine cut him off gently but with undeniable firmness. Mr. Henderson, that wasn't my question. Did you or did you not instruct your staff via that email to disregard the error logs? Please answer yes or no. Her control of the cross-examination and indeed the courtroom felt absolute now. The judge didn't intervene. He sat slumped slightly in his high-backed chair, watching the proceedings almost passively, silent. Davies, the opposing counsel, didn't object. He just looked resigned, perhaps even relieved the focus was off the judge. Yes, Henderson mumbled finally, his voice barely audible, defeated. Thank you, Mr. Henderson. No further clarification needed on that point. Jasmine continued her questioning, methodically, relentlessly, patiently. She dismantled the rest of his carefully constructed testimony piece by piece over the next hour, using internal documents, using his own prior deposition statements, using logic. All while maintaining that same extraordinary level of unwavering calm and professional courtesy. Albright watched the proceedings like a spectator at his own slow, public execution. The authority, the arrogance had completely drained from him. He made rulings when necessary, responding to routine objections, but his voice remained monotone, perfunctory. He seemed to just want the hearing, the entire ordeal to be over, to escape the room. The audience watched, utterly fascinated. They were witnessing the complete deflation of a powerful, intimidating figure, brought about not by shouting, not by aggression, not by political maneuvering, but by quiet competence, unflinching truth, and the strategic, powerful use of silence and composure under extreme pressure. When Jasmine finally finished her devastating cross-examination, she said simply, her voice even, "No further questions for this witness at this time, Your Honor." Albright nodded wordlessly, seemingly relieved. He looked exhausted, older than he had just a few hours ago. The rest of the hearing proceeded in a strange haze. The sharp tension was gone, replaced by a subdued, almost awkward atmosphere. It felt like everyone, the lawyers, the judge, the gallery, was just going through the necessary motions. The real climax, the real resolution of the underlying conflict, had already occurred hours earlier. When it was finally, mercifully over, Albright mumbled his closing remarks, barely looking up from his notes. The court has heard the testimony and the arguments presented by both sides. The court will take all matters under advisement. A written ruling will follow in due course. He banged the gavel softly, almost apologetically. A stark contrast to his earlier sharp raps. Court is adjourned. He stood up quickly, deliberately avoided looking towards Jasmine's table, and walked out through his private door rapidly, shoulders noticeably slumped. The implosion hadn't been fiery and loud. It had been quiet, A slow, internal collapse under pressure, but it was utterly devastating to his authority nonetheless. His credibility in that courtroom, perhaps in the entire courthouse, was shattered, maybe beyond repair, and he knew it. The courtroom emptied slowly, reluctantly. People lingered, talking in hushed, excited tones, processing what they had witnessed, comparing notes, speculating on the fallout. Jasmine packed her briefcase methodically, arranging files, clicking pens, trying to decompress internally while maintaining outward composure. Mr. Davies, the opposing counsel, approached her table hesitantly, almost sheepishly. Ms. Crockett, that was quite something today. He looked genuinely taken aback, perhaps even a little admiring, despite being on the losing end of the Henderson cross-examination. Jasmine offered a small, professional nod, meeting his eye briefly. Just doing my job, Mr. Davies, presenting the facts as clearly as possible for the court. He shook his head slightly, a wry smile playing on his lips. Well, you certainly did that, and then some. Good day. He retreated quickly, perhaps eager to debrief his own shell-shocked client. Jasmine zipped her briefcase shut, stood up straight, took a deep breath, ready to leave, ready for this incredibly long and draining day to finally be over. As she turned towards the main exit, she saw Judge Albright standing near the side door, the one leading out to the public hallway, not back to his private chambers. He seemed to be waiting, lingering. Her stomach tightened slightly. What now? Had he reconsidered? Was he going to confront her outside the formal constraints of the courtroom? She considered walking the other way, using the main doors, but that felt like avoidance, like conceding ground she had fought so hard to hold. She met his gaze across the emptying room and walked towards the side door, calmly, directly, maintaining eye contact. He stepped forward slightly as she approached, blocking the exit momentarily. Ms. Crockett, his voice was low, quiet, almost unrecognizable from the booming, condescending authority he had projected earlier that day. Yes, Your Honor. She kept her tone perfectly neutral, professional, respectful of the office still. Waiting, he hesitated, looked down the now empty hallway beyond the door. Then back at her. His face was a complex mixture of conflicting emotions, embarrassment, lingering resentment, and something else. Was it grudging respect, or perhaps fear? I wanted to say. He struggled visibly. This was clearly incredibly difficult for him, his pride warring with something else. The courtroom, it requires decorum. From everyone involved, myself included. It was the closest he could possibly get to an apology. A heavily veiled, self-serving admission that he too had perhaps crossed a line. Jasmine didn't grant him the absolution he might have been seeking. She didn't say, "Thank you, Your Honor," or "I understand." She simply held his gaze, let the silence sit there between them, making him own the profound inadequacy, the vagueness of his words. He shifted his weight uncomfortably from foot to foot, clearly unnerved by her steady, silent gaze. These proceedings, they can become intensely adversarial. By their very nature, it's important, vitally important, not to personalize things on either side. He was trying desperately to explain away his behavior, to minimize it, to frame his targeted attacks and subsequent meltdown as just part of the rough-and-tumble process, not evidence of personal animosity or bias. Jasmine knew better. Everyone who had been in that courtroom today knew better. She offered another one of her slow, deliberate blinks, a technique she was rapidly perfecting, conveying acknowledgement of his words without agreeing with their substance. "Understood, Your Honor." Her voice remained perfectly level, cool, giving absolutely nothing away, revealing no emotion. He seemed to deflate even further at her non-response. He had clearly hoped for something more, some signal that the incident could be smoothed over, mutually forgotten, put behind them. Her professional courtesy, combined with her absolute refusal to engage on a personal level or accept his weak rationalization, was its own form of powerful rebuke. He cleared his throat again, searching for an exit. Well, just wanted to mention that, for the record, maintain professionalism on all sides, moving forward. He was essentially begging for a truce, for a return to the status quo ante, for her to implicitly agree to let this entire episode go, never speak of it. Jasmine gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. "Professionalism is always paramount, Your Honor. Good afternoon." She didn't offer a handshake, didn't soften her stance or her expression, didn't offer any false reassurances. She simply concluded the awkward conversation, politely but firmly, and walked past him out into the hallway, leaving him standing there, alone, looking somehow smaller, diminished in the grand, empty space outside his own courtroom. He watched her walk away. Her posture impeccably straight, her footsteps echoing slightly on the polished floor. He had ruled against her motion earlier in the day. He still held that raw power, the power of the gavel. But he knew with a chilling certainty that settled deep in his gut that he had lost something far more significant today. He had lost the respect of his courtroom. He had lost his carefully crafted aura of unquestionable authority. And he had been utterly, comprehensively outmaneuvered by the young lawyer he had tried so relentlessly, so foolishly to diminish. He felt a profound sense of weariness wash over him, and a dawning, terrifying thought pierced through his fatigue. What if someone recorded that exchange in the courtroom? That final confrontation? What if that moment, that single devastating sentence she delivered, got out, leaked, went public? The thought made his blood run cold, the potential fallout. He turned abruptly and walked quickly, almost scurrying towards the safety of his chambers, suddenly desperate for solitude, wanting to escape the imagined eyes, the imagined whispers, the memory of his own unraveling. But there was no escape from the memory, no escape from the gnawing feeling of his power crumbling in the face of quiet, unyielding truth. Jasmine walked out of the imposing courthouse building into the bright afternoon sun. She paused on the top step, took a deep breath of the relatively fresh city air. It felt good, clean, cleansing. She hadn't won the war, not yet. The underlying case was still ongoing. Battles remained. But she had undeniably won a crucial battle today, a battle for respect, a battle against bias. And she had done it without compromising her integrity, without stooping to his level, without losing her cool. There was no feeling of elation, no desire to pump her fist in victory. Just a quiet, bone-deep sense of tired satisfaction, and a growing, unsettling awareness that the ripples from today's events might spread much further than she initially thought or intended. She pulled out her phone as she walked down the steps, saw several missed calls from colleagues, a flurry of text messages. Heard something major happened with Albright today. Are you okay? OMG, Jasmine, call me. What did Albright do? Word was already spreading rapidly within the tight-knit legal community. Gossip travels fast. She typed back a simple, concise reply to one concerned colleague. All good here, situation handled effectively. But she knew deep down it wasn't just handled. It felt like something significant, something fundamental had shifted today, not just in that specific courtroom, maybe somewhere larger, in the atmosphere. The quiet respect she felt walking out of that building wasn't just from the gallery spectators. It felt earned, profoundly earned. And deeply uncomfortable, because that respect came at the cost of exposing something ugly. Something powerful people like Judge Albright preferred desperately to keep hidden behind closed doors and judicial robes. The day ended not with a bang or a win or a loss, but with a quiet, unsettling, powerful resonance. It started with a single tweet later that evening, from someone claiming to be in the courtroom that day. You will not believe what just happened in Judge Albright's courtroom this afternoon. Young lawyer calmly dismantles him after he threatens sanctions over nothing. Judge practically runs out of the room. Clip coming soon. Courtroom drama bias abuse of power, then another confirming the name. Witnessing Judge Albright completely lose his composure today after trying relentlessly to bully attorney Jasmine Crockett. Yes, THAT Jasmine Crockett, the congresswoman. She handled his nonsense with absolute grace and steel. Unreal. Just as quiet power Albright meltdown, then the clip surfaced. Just 90 seconds long. Grainy cell phone footage obviously shot discreetly. Shaky at first, focusing on Albright, then swinging towards Jasmine at the lectern. But the audio was surprisingly clear. You could hear Albright's condescending tone escalating into the sharp threat of sanctions. You could hear Jasmine's calm, clear citation of the evidence rule. And then the line delivered with chilling precision. Feels like an attempt to obstruct the pursuit of truth rather than uphold it. Followed by the dead silence. Albright's stunned, sputtering attempts to respond. His weak, hasty call for a recess. His abrupt, undignified exit. It exploded online. First on legal Twitter, where lawyers dissected the exchange, the rule citation, the judge's clear overreach. Then it jumped to broader platforms. TikTokers stitched the video, adding commentary, dramatic music, reaction faces. Judge Albright meltdown started trending globally within hours. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just discussed as a congresswoman anymore. In this context, she became a symbol of something else. Poise under pressure, speaking truth to power. Headlines popped up like wildfire across online news outlets. Shock video: Federal Judge Albright threatens attorney Jasmine Crockett before fleeing own courtroom. Rep Crockett faces down clearly biased judge, intense courtroom exchange, gone viral. The quiet sentence that silenced a judge. Watch Jasmine Crockett's masterclass in composure and law. Cable news channels picked it up by the next morning. Pundits debated the implications endlessly. Some attempted to defend Albright, talking vaguely about the immense pressures on judges, the need for absolute courtroom control, suggesting perhaps Crockett was intentionally grandstanding, playing to the gallery, maybe even aware she was being recorded. Was the lawyer deliberately provocative to elicit this reaction? One host asked, playing devil's advocate without conviction. Are we losing necessary respect for judicial authority in the age of social media? Another fretted, clutching pearls. But the overwhelming sentiment online, and increasingly reflected in mainstream commentary, was radically different. People saw the pattern described by online witnesses, the alleged microaggressions leading up to the blow-up. They saw Albright's reaction not as legitimate judicial authority, but as the tantrum of a wounded ego, a clear abuse of power caught on tape. And they saw Jasmine's response as heroic restraint, surgical truth-telling, calm defiance in the face of blatant bullying. Podcasters immediately did deep dives, analyzing the power dynamics, the intersection of gender, race, and authority in the courtroom, undertones unspoken in the clip but palpable to many viewers. This wasn't just about one case, one lawyer, one judge, a prominent legal analyst explained on a hugely popular podcast. This resonated because it was about every single person who's ever felt diminished, underestimated, or shut down by someone in a position of power, who's had their competence questioned unfairly just for doing their job. Her calmness, her refusal to meet his aggression with aggression, that was the key, a communications expert noted on another morning show segment. She didn't mirror his energy. She absorbed his hostility and reflected his own unprofessional behavior back at him using the language of his own institution. That's precisely where the power flip happened, and why it's so compelling. Morning shows replayed the clip incessantly. Close-ups of Albright's flustered, angry face filled national television screens. His carefully cultivated public image of the charming, experienced, authoritative judge shattered literally overnight. Calls for formal investigations into his judicial conduct immediately emerged. Bar associations fielded numerous inquiries. The judiciary, an institution usually insulated from such direct, viral public scrutiny, faced deeply uncomfortable questions about accountability and bias. Jasmine herself remained relatively quiet through the initial media storm. Her congressional office issued a brief, carefully worded statement. Congresswoman Crockett believes deeply in the integrity of the judicial process and the vital importance of vigorous, ethical advocacy within that system. Her focus remains steadfastly on serving her clients and constituents to the best of her ability. But the story had already taken on a life completely its own. People flooded social media, sharing their own personal experiences with biased judges, hostile bosses, dismissive authority figures in all walks of life. Hash trended briefly, a testament to the chord the incident struck. The clip became a powerful meme, a shareable symbol of speaking truth to power, not necessarily loudly, but calmly, firmly, and effectively. There was inevitable backlash, of course. Ugly, racist, and sexist vitriol directed at Jasmine online. Accusations of her playing the victim, of disrespecting the court for political gain. Standard tactics, but it was largely drowned out by the massive wave of public admiration and support. The quiet sentence resonated far beyond the legal world. It became a mantra for some facing their own workplace injustices, obstructing the pursuit of truth. It perfectly captured the moral essence of the confrontation, the core of her quiet victory. She hadn't sought the spotlight in that courtroom. She hadn't planned or orchestrated a viral moment. She had simply defended her client vigorously, defended her own professional integrity under attack, and in doing so had inadvertently tapped into a deep, collective reservoir of frustration with the pervasive misuse of power and authority. The formal ruling in the actual underlying case, when it finally came weeks later, felt almost anticlimactic. Judge Albright, perhaps thoroughly chastened by the public humiliation, or perhaps just wanting the entire embarrassing episode to disappear from memory, issued a carefully worded, deliberately neutral ruling. Neither side got everything they wanted. A muted, technical end to the specific legal dispute itself, but the cultural impact lingered powerfully. Judge Albright kept his lifetime appointment, but his reputation was irrevocably tarnished. Lawyers approaching his courtroom reportedly felt newly emboldened. The power dynamics in his domain had permanently shifted. His name became shorthand for judicial overreach and bias. Jasmine Crockett, already a rising political figure, became an even more prominent national voice, sought after not just for political commentary, but for insights on justice, systemic bias, resilience, and grace under pressure. The moment didn't end with a triumphant victory lap. It didn't need one. It ended and continues to end with resonance. A quiet sentence echoing far beyond the courtroom walls. A potent reminder that true power doesn't always roar or bully. Sometimes it speaks softly, holds its ground firmly, refuses to be intimidated, and simply, devastatingly, tells the truth. The judge who mocked her, who tried relentlessly to break her spirit, ended up inadvertently broken himself. Not by her anger, but by her unyielding calm. And the internet watched it all unfold, transforming a tense, uncomfortable courtroom exchange into a lasting, shared lesson in the unexpected power of quiet dominance. The pursuit of truth, in its own unpredictable way, had been dramatically upheld.